Good afternoon and welcome one and all. My name is Krupa Krishnan. I lead content and design for the enterprise business of Times Professional Learning. And it is an absolute honor for me to be able to welcome you here today for this event. Well, thank you for choosing to attend this event despite your busy schedule, specifically during times when change, like I would call it, the bittersweet evil seems to be staring at our faces every single day with a new challenge to tackle, a new roadblock to eliminate, so that our businesses continue to thrive. It does keep you leaders on your toes, right? And in such a scenario, you would agree that communicating with your teams in a way that they are as impassioned as you are to embrace change continues to be an elusive concept. Well, keeping that in mind, Times Professional Learning brings to you an extremely relevant webinar titled Communication for Change by none other than Steve Dawson himself. So if you love sports, you've heard of Steve Dawson for sure. Steve is a globally established communication coach who coaches corporates to present their data and innovations in boardrooms, ballrooms, and social media platforms, online and on TV. He has been the face of football, mixed martial arts, and general sports throughout Asia, anchoring premium content at ESPN, Star Sports, and Fox Sports since 2004. Steve is a British citizen residing in Singapore since 1994, has a BA Honours in Economics and Public Administration from the University of London. He's also an author of 3 books, including the most recently published, The Locker Room Talk, a guide to political correctness in the public domain. Steve, thank you so much for joining us. Well, over to you, please. We are all waiting.
Well, Krupa, thank you very much for that kind introduction. It's lovely to be with everybody here. As you said, I'm in Singapore. I can't wait for the time when I can come back to India and see some good friends again. I'm quite confident that we'll come out of this pandemic very soon. It's a changing time, isn't it? And it's probably pertinent that we talk about communication for change now. And Krupa, I like that you referred to it as that bittersweet evil. That's very much the case, isn't it? Change can be good, and certainly the whole point of change is that so that we can get to a place that's better than we are now. But the process, even if we know there's something better coming, can be quite disrupting, quite stressful. I did a Google search the other day, and I asked Google for the 5 most stressful life events, and this is what we came up with. The passing of a loved one. I mean, self-explanatory, of course. This is something that nobody really knows how to deal with properly, and it's all a developing situation, a learning curve for many of us as we personally go through life. Divorce, again, something that speaks for itself. You're in a relationship that you hope is going to last forever and certainly going to endure during your lifetime, but divorce means that that's not going to be the case, and that's very disruptive, and that's a big changing element in our life. By moving, we mean moving house. You know, we have a bedrock, we have a home base. It's our comfort zone, our security blanket. After a hard day's work or whatever it is we're doing, it's always nice, isn't it, to come home, to be where we have chosen to situate ourselves. To then have to move, of course, can be quite a debilitating thing, something that can cause anxiety and certainly create an awful lot of mind space that we don't necessarily want to deal with. Major illness and injury. I suppose that's not just for ourselves, but if a loved one is experiencing illness or injury, then that's a changing aspect of our life that we also find tricky to navigate. And the last one was job loss. I mean, we're all talking about our careers here and how to communicate within our careers and our job space. The idea of losing our job, and that really means not a voluntary move, but having our livelihood cut away from us, is challenging. And the things that all of these 5 issues have in common is that they are changing aspects of our lives. It results in change, moving from one place to another. And this, I think, is what causes the stress. The dark clouds sort of hover above us, and it's not necessarily a comfortable time at all. In fact, some of us would be very keen to shy away from the entire approach to change. We just like to stay where we are and have things remain the same so that we can stay in our comfort zone, please. Well, it's not all about dark clouds. With change being just ahead, there is, as I said just a few moments ago, often the opportunity of greater things. That's why sometimes we change voluntarily. I'm sure you've all experienced that even when change comes without you beginning it, when something forces change upon you, that old expression of when one door closes, another door opens. There is very often blue skies and nice white fluffy non-threatening clouds in the future. And of course, in the business environment in particular, we are constantly experiencing change, aren't we? I referenced the pandemic at the beginning of this presentation. Moving into the pandemic was a great upheaval. Change was afoot everywhere. The very way we go to work, if go is the right word, because really we're just, for the most part, staying put, aren't we? We're working from home. That's what I'm doing today. But post-pandemic recovery is going to be another element. It's been with us, this pandemic, now for a year and a half or so, and it's going to be with us for quite a bit longer before we see those blue skies. And that in itself is change. We think perhaps it's positive, but some people, I understand, are having a little bit of anxiety about the whole idea of going back to work. So comfortable are they in their home base? So post-pandemic recovery is a change that we as leaders certainly need to manage for our people. The geopolitical landscape changes our business landscape constantly. Individual countries get stronger and stronger. We've all expected this from India, and we see it over the past 2 decades, that since I've been looking at things closely, and since I've been based in Asia in particular, you see the rise, the power that India has, China as well, and the United States, and perhaps even the United Kingdom from many, many years ago, let's be fair to the United Kingdom. But things change all the while, don't they? And that does change the way we do business. And of course, the internet means that we can do business. More and more markets, not just in our immediate surroundings. And that's what technological disruptions are all about. I remember reading, and to an extent worrying, about how robots were going to take our jobs. I'm not sure that that's really happened in terms of walking and talking robots, but quite clearly automation and technology does change our business environment. And you know as well as I do that that does create a little bit of panic among the workforce. Is our job going to be taken over by AI or some other great technology? In reality, what happens is that our jobs change. We end up servicing different aspects of the business, and the whole thing becomes slightly more convenient for us. So technology, I think, is a good thing to embrace, but the changing aspect of it and the uncertainty about how it will look and feel can be something that our teammates do worry a little bit about. And again, as leaders, this is something we ought to be very positive about and make sure that we communicate effectively so that people don't run away with the wrong idea and panic unnecessarily. Well, dynamic market conditions is a feature of every business market, and I'm sure you're thoroughly experienced in dealing with those. We go through ebbs and flows. There are boom periods and there are not so boom periods. And of course, this is a time where that means people will be retrenched. They'll be made redundant, lose their jobs, and perhaps struggle to find a way back into the job market. And it may mean that people have to change their career. And again, as leaders, as we invite new people to our industry, and as we let people go, or as we have people in that state of flux where nobody's really quite sure what's happening because of these dynamic market conditions, what we know may not be infinite, but the finite things that we do know, we must be careful to share and communicate with our people as well as we can. And that's something that we're going to be talking about today. This book, Who Moved My Cheese, is something that was given to me. I've actually got it here. Maybe you can see it. I was given this by my wife's aunt about 20 years ago, actually. It's quite an old book. It's about mice living in a maze. You may be familiar with it. These mice were very comfortable. Every day, several blocks of cheese would be dropped into the maze, and they would gorge on the cheese. They'd have the best time of their lives eating the cheese and then having a nice little siesta after that. What a great life, just sitting there with your friends. In comes the food, have a little sleep. And then one day the cheese stopped coming. And this was a curious situation, a little bit problematic, no food for that day. But they hung around to see what would happen the next day. And sure enough, no cheese was delivered the next day either. and the next day and the day after that. And eventually some of the mice realized that this was going to be a huge problem. How could they survive without food? So perhaps the more adventurous, perhaps the younger of the mice went away, and they moved through the maze, and they kept searching until one day they found another corner of the maze where there was a lump of cheese, and they ate the cheese and they stayed there. And the next day, more cheese was delivered, and they were able to reclaim their livelihood. But they thought of their friends back in the original area of the maze, and they went back to say, look, we found a place. We're sure that cheese comes every day. You can live as we lived before. Things will be as comfortable as they were before. Sure enough, some of those mice followed them, and they went to the new location where the cheese was. But some of them, perhaps the older ones, perhaps the ones that felt they weren't quite equipped for change, this new location, stayed where they were, hoping, clinging to the idea that the good old days would return, that cheese would drop from the sky and they could stay in their comfort zone and continue to eat their cheese. And they became frail, and well, I'm sure you can guess the ending. It's really an allegorical story about embracing change, being willing to accept it and moving with the times. Really the least smart thing you can do is just assume that everything's going to come back to normal. These things don't really happen, not in the dynamic business world that you and I thrive in. And so we must be able to adapt for change. And I think leaders are well placed to do that. That's one of the strengths that got us into the position we are today. But how well can we communicate that strength that we have and share it with the people who are working with us, our team members? Well, this is very, very important. I present the example of WeWork. You may be familiar with this organization. They are a fairly dexterous organization. They rent out space, and their clients come and do work in their offices in many cities around the world on a short-term basis, perhaps just for a couple of hours. Perhaps they'll take the office for a day, or maybe for a few weeks on a project basis. But they're not the kind of property owners or retails or office space owners that will lease out space for years at a time. When the pandemic hit and everybody was forced into this new normal where we work from home, and we all realized, didn't we, fairly quickly that a lot of us, not all of us, but a lot of us can actually quite effectively work from home. And that work-life balance that we've all been hankering for many years, but we all knew in reality that nobody was actually going to do anything about it, finally arrived. We can do work in our little space in our homes, most of us, not all of us, it's difficult for some. And at the same time, we can have direct access to our family. We can cut out that commuting time, which could be several hours a day for some people in some parts of the world, and get our lives back. This has been a big bonus for a lot of people. But what did it mean on the face of things for WeWork, who'd invested all of this money in office space? Central business districts around the world were losing the people that previously populated them. And it looked like WeWork were going to lose money. And actually, with people cutting down on their office space by some 30, 40% across the board and around the world, knowing that the future means that some of their employees will be working at home at least some of the time, WeWork kind of evolved and sort of changed the narrative. We can offer you the flexibility that you need. You're not going to have the same number of people in your office every day. It's going to fluctuate according to their own personal needs and the demands of your business. WeWork then suddenly became very well placed to offer the new world a new way of doing business in office-based areas. There must, though, have been a period of panic for employees of WeWork. And as soon as the leaders realized that they were able to pivot from an area where potentially it was all going to go wrong to a time and a place where potentially it could all go very, very well, that communication must have been absolutely paramount. And I wonder how many people they lost, how many investors they lost in the gap between this evolving situation and the realization that they could actually cope very well, and the communication where that ability to cope was shared with all of the various stakeholders. It's a key element, and it'll be interesting to see how WeWork evolve as we move through the pandemic and hopefully come out of the other side. So as we talk about communicating with our team and how leaders communicate, I'd ask you to think about 3 letters, ACE, which conveniently forms the word ACE. Let's ace our communication leadership. What does ACE stand for? Well, authenticity. We all have great experience, don't we, of listening to people, of watching people as they speak to us about serious leadership aspects of life, or just about every other aspect of life, trivial as some of these may be. And we all have very smart detectors for when people are being authentic. Sure, we can pull the wool over some people's eyes, but there are plenty of people out there who know, they have this innate feeling to understand when somebody is being genuine and when somebody is not being quite so genuine. And authenticity is a very key element of leadership. How does it manifest itself? How do we generate that authenticity? Well, energy is a key element to this. When I was a reporter at Channel I News, which was a news television show in Singapore many years ago, I, like most reporters, hankered to be the studio anchor. I wanted to actually read the news in the studio. I didn't just want to be a reporter in the field. And so I arranged a screen test in the middle of the day on one of our working days. And I did last night's show, and my executive producer watched me do it. And I thought to myself, well, really, all I need to do here is communicate well. I need to not misspeak. I need to have a clear, strong voice. I need to be, to not stutter, to get the script correct, and not stumble. And I think by and large, over the half-hour show, I achieved that. And I thought to myself, yes, I could well be Channel I's next newsreader. And I went to see my executive producer and said to her, what do you think? What do you think? And she said, oh, you need more energy. And I thought, well, what does that mean? Do you want me to do star jumps and cartwheels while I'm reading the news? How does that work? And it is a bit of a vague concept. It's certainly not shouting. Nobody likes to be shouted at. That's really annoying. Nobody really wants that. But it helps a little bit to be able to project your voice more than perhaps if you were speaking to somebody who's just a few feet away from you and you're in a public place and you don't want anyone to hear. So projecting your voice, perhaps at this level, as if somebody was 5 meters away from you, that's a good way of initiating energy. But really, it's all about the hands. You may have noticed that as I speak, I tend to use my hands a lot. My children often remark upon it. Maybe it's just something that comes naturally to me. But hands and what you do with your eyes and your eyebrows actually mean that you're committed to what you're saying. You're not just being an audio speaker. You may have great content. You may have wonderful things to say. But if you simply sit there and say it in a monotone without moving your face or your hands, all of these wonderful, wonderful words that you say will lose some currency and some energy, as compared with if you feel what you're saying. If you have and exhibit enthusiasm for what you're saying, then you'll find that your audience pays greater attention and they feel that you have found something that resonates with you. They'll feel that this is probably something that can resonate with them. People tend to listen in a different way if you have this energy about you. And it's really all about hands and eyes and eyebrows and smiling as well. You know, that means that you're approachable. And as a leader, surely that's one of the key elements. If we are leading a team, we want them to feel that they can come to see us. Of course, as leaders, we don't want to be inundated with people knocking on our door every hour of the day. We won't get any work done, but we do want people to feel that when the time is right, they can approach us and have a discussion with us. But of course, that enables us to take on board their great ideas. No company can be about one brain, can it? If leaders can be facilitators, then what a great thing we've done for the organization as leaders. We've empowered the entire organization to think as one and move forward with a greater sense of awareness of the wider world. So energy is key, And when you're standing before an audience, perhaps with a PowerPoint presentation behind you, which we'll get to in a second, or even if you're talking one-on-one with people in a meeting, that's going to be a very important aspect of your leadership communication. But what about in this situation, you know, where we're sitting in front of a laptop and we're looking at the tiniest of little pinhole cameras? How do we communicate that kind of energy, that kind of compassion, if needed, that kind of authenticity? There's a few things we can do here. And one of them is what I hope I'm doing now, which is looking at you through the lens, rather than looking at my screen, which I'm doing in 3, 2, 1, now. I'm looking at my screen, I'm looking at Captain Kirk, looking into his communicator and communicating with his team, and I'm not making that eye connection with you anymore. Every reason then for you to sort of drift off and feel that I'm not putting the effort in to communicate with you personally. If instead I go back up to the lens, as I'm going to do in 3, 2, 1, now, there's that connection that we're striving for, even though we are in different rooms, and as is the case today, in different parts of the planet. Here I am in Singapore, you guys elsewhere in the world. But we can get that connection by looking at each other. And as you talk to me, if it's a two-way exchange, then why not? Why not have me look at the screen so that I can see you, I can look you in the eye and get more than just what you're saying to me. I'm getting the full essence of your communication. There are other things as well that can enable energy in this format. For example, lighting. You know, make sure that you're well lit. Just behind my laptop, I've got a window. A lot of people would like that as the backdrop, something interesting perhaps, or fanciful to look at. Well, maybe it could be distracting though. Better to have that natural light on your face so that you can say every time I raise my eyebrows, every time I furrow my brow because things are concerning, every time I smile because we've got an awful lot to look forward to here, you can feel it, you can see it, and you get that authenticity in the level of my communication, which is, I would suggest, a really crucial thing. So A for authenticity, C for clarity. And I'm thinking here about that situation where you're in a room and you're presenting to 10, 12 people, perhaps in a boardroom, or maybe you're on a stage and you're communicating to the wider audience within your organization. Maybe there's 100 or 200 of you in a ballroom or in a big conference room, and there's a big message that you're conveying. Well, how do you do that? Well, we often do it with a presentation and with slides. And PowerPoint is a wonderful thing. Infinite possibilities with PowerPoint. But it is also the #1 reason that people leave the room where a presentation has taken place having just missed something, having not been able to absorb the message, having not understood it. And the problem is that PowerPoint tends to compete with the presenter. And I spend a lot of time on this with my clients, and we'll get a little glimpse of it to Jay, just to make sure that you are using PowerPoint to help you rather than hinder you. And before we do that, let's think about what a presentation is. Well, it's one person, isn't it, who has knowledge that they want to transfer to many people. And this has been going on for centuries, millennia, in fact, long before PowerPoint was invented. One of the key ways of doing that was through a book. This, frankly, looks like a book that I should probably buy. And what would encourage my investment in this book? Well, I go through, you know, the aisles of a bookshop, and I go to the right section and I pull out this book, and yeah, let's face it, I would be quite enticed by the cover. It's been designed that way to win my heart and mind. I might do a little bit more due diligence, look at the table of contents to make sure that it is going to cover what I want it to cover. I might also just dip into the odd paragraph to ensure that it speaks to me in the way I'd like it to, that maybe it's not pitched too high, it'll all go over my head, or maybe it's just too basic and I know this stuff already. That's the process that I would go through in order to invest in that book. And when we're communicating to our team, we want them to invest in our ideas, how we're going to take people forward. What doesn't happen in a bookshop is that the proprietor doesn't come up to me, pull that book off the shelf, and then start reading chapter 1 to me, followed by chapter 2 and chapter 3. Too much information in a place where I don't want it, at a time when I don't want it. I want my heart and mind to be one so that I can go into an area of comfort, and when I want to, I can then get into the detail, the nitty-gritty. It's the same with a newspaper. The headline speaks to me, wins my heart and mind, and persuades me to purchase the newspaper. The newspaper vendor doesn't come up to me and start reading the lead story and then turning to page 2 and reading that story. I don't want that level of detail at that point. Same in the business world. Your boss asks you to research something and you may spend weeks on it. You don't then go into his office and read the 60-page report to him. You present him with the executive summary and perhaps have a little chat about it. Having won his heart and mind and convinced him that your recommendations are worth further consideration, he'll then do his due diligence and read your report or aspect of it when he's ready to do so. Same with a business presentation. We don't want to overwhelm our people when we are communicating change to them and how we're going to navigate this change. Let's just give them the overview. Let's get them excited. Let's get them encouraged, and let's get them feeling safe and secure under your leadership. Subsequently, we can give them the detail once their hearts and mind are one. So PowerPoint is the way we do this. And we've got some interactive questions. There's a couple of questions that we want to pose to you today. And the first one is about how quickly you're able to read things. So let's have that question and get you to answer it for us. The question is, how quickly can you read things that are important to digest? We've got a few options here for you. The first one is, well, I'm a fast reader. I can do that. The second option is, I'd say I read at average speeds. And the third option is, to be honest, I'm a pretty slow reader. And, you know, if I'm asked this question, I have to stick my hand up in the air and say, let me be very frank with you. I'm very aware, actually, that I am quite a slow reader. This is something that hasn't been a real problem for me over my lifetime, but I am aware when I read a book and someone's maybe looking over my shoulder, they want me to turn the page long before I'm ready to do so. I do know people who read very quickly, you know, and these are often very smart people. I wonder the level of detail that they're picking up. People are quite effective at scanning quite often. Now, let me see if I can get to our text area now and get the results. Go to the text box, because I think as you're putting in your results, we should be able to establish how quickly you can all read. On television, we put up graphics sometimes. You might be cricket fans when you see, you know, historical aspects come in, you know, the top wicket takers of all time. You look at that and you think, oh, this is great information, but it's almost always there for too short a time. We're not able to read it quickly enough. And this is a lack of understanding on the part of the television producer, that some people can't read, can't take in all of that information as quickly as they might like you to. And part of the problem is that the people who built the graphic are very familiar with it, but they can't quite understand that the people who are reading it have only seen it for the first time. So here are the results. People who consider themselves to be quick readers, 10%. Almost 3/4 of you are only average readers. And yes, a significant number, just under 1/5 of you, would consider yourselves to be, like me, fairly slow readers. Well, I sympathize. And like me, if you were to see a slide like this, you would probably panic. A slide like this means that you are anxious. Is he going to change the page before I get a chance to absorb everything that's there? Our brains just don't work in this way. We're not able to take in this kind of information and listen to the speaker at the same time. And that's the problem. If you really wanted people to read this kind of information on a slide, you have to say to them, ladies and gentlemen, do please just take a few moments to read that slide. And then you'd wander to the side of the room and wait. That's not a presentation, is it? Given that you don't actually want people to read all of this detail that you've put there, you must ask yourself, well, why? Why is it there? Particularly if it's actually distracting, if it's preventing our audience from listening to what the presenter is saying. I always give the example of sitting on the hillside of a valley in the south of France and you're listening to a podcast on conservation of the French countryside, as you look out the window, you can see streams and blue sky and fluffy clouds and sheep grazing in the field and lovely trees. And as you're listening to this podcast on how to save the French countryside, this is a good experience. You're listening, you're interested, and you're getting all of this flavorful, visual, complementary information as you look out of the window. But if you pull the blind down, and you take a book from the shelf and it's on conservation of the French countryside and you open it up, and let's assume it's precisely the chapter that corresponds to what you're listening to on the podcast, what's that like? Well, you'll read the book and listen, and you'll realize that you haven't taken in any of the last page and a half because you've been listening. So you have to turn back and read again. Or perhaps you have taken it in, but you realize you haven't been able to listen to what was on the podcast, so you have to rewind. You see, we're not wired to do that. We can't read that amount of detail, and we can't listen to a presenter at the same time. So don't do that to your audience. Keep your visuals flavorful, simple. Allow them to watch you. Remember, you're the leader. Allow them to take their cue from you. You are the central figure here. And changing your philosophy on how you build your slides means that you transform from this leader who has her back to her audience and is really merely being a conduit for her slides. Her slides are the important feature here. And you'll become this leader, one who actually speaks to her audience, connects with her audience, and the slides do nothing more than enhance what she's saying. They signpost, they signal, they point and help get the message across. They don't conflict and they don't fight with the presenter who's on the stage or standing at the front of the boardroom. So authenticity, clarity, the E in ACE is empathy. And empathy is a very key thing. It's all about how we make our audience feel. As I said earlier on, you may have fabulous content. The things that you're saying may be absolutely mind-blowing, but if you deliver it in a poor, low energy way, people will be a bit bored. But if you also deliver it in a way without thinking about how your audience might receive it, they may still be struck with a little bit of fear. They may have some anxiety. They may be a little bit worried about how we're going to achieve this goal that you have. Only in the past week, I've spent 3 hours with a client, the CEO of a very high-tech company who's very able, really very capable, very smart man. And his company, I think, are going to do very big things. But credit to him, one of the things that he flagged up for me to think about how we can work together to solve the problem that he has is that he finds this disconnect between him and his team, his employees. He wants to meet them like that. He wants to be able to relate to them. He understands that he's probably, he's one of these elite people who's probably smarter than most of the people around him, but he doesn't want to miss that connection with his team. And we spent a long time, and there is a lot to say about how you can allow yourself to relate to your people. So this is not the other way around. It's not about how your people can understand you, which is what we spoke about with clarity. It's not about authenticity, again, how your people view you. This is about how you view them. You must be aware of your audience. Do they speak your language? I mean, literally. Is the language you're speaking their first, second language? Is it their third language? Can they understand you at all? But beyond that, even if they can understand you, how are you making them feel? This is absolutely key. And I can give you an example from work. We were at Fox Sports. We'd lost the ESPN logo at that time, so we couldn't present SportsCenter. Many of you perhaps will have watched SportsCenter India. And we had to transition from a sports news show that couldn't carry that brand anymore. And we called it Fox Sports Central. And it went through a number of iterations. And there were some fundamental changes to that show that meant that ultimately it didn't succeed. But the very last iteration, I remember our leader standing in front of us, and he told us about the changes that were going to be made. And the parting words to us were, this is your last chance. If this doesn't work, we may not get another chance. It's your last chance. Your last chance. Your last chance. He put everything on us. He was our leader, but he was separating himself from the problem. He was putting it all upon us, and that didn't make any of us feel particularly good. We may not have had a great deal of confidence in him, in his leadership, but it would have been nice to know that he was there with us, that we were facing this together, and that instead what he was doing was really putting the responsibility of our success, which should have sat squarely on his shoulders, on his team. And that created a bit of a bad taste in the mouth. And this is something that we need to be thinking about always. We do a lot of hard work. Visualize a box with all of the wonderful hard work that we've done. We can see into that box. We can open it up and see everything that's in it. But our team only get a narrow view of it. They can maybe peek through the keyhole that unlocks the box. And that keyhole is provided by the communication that we provide for them. It's only a narrow view of everything that we know, everything that we do, everything that we envisage. How critical it is then that when we share that communication, it's done in a smart way, that we are authentic, we come across as genuine, that we are clear, that things cannot be misunderstood or misinterpreted, and that we have empathy, that at the end of the day, we understand how the team feel, and they can rely on that. We know them. We've put ourselves in a situation where we can assess how they feel, and we'll always have that at the back of our mind, that we'll be aware of it. We won't just cast them outside and get them to struggle on with things on their own. So ACE, I think, is something that we can continue at the back of our mind with as we navigate the various changes that life and the business world throw at us. And I urge you, as you communicate with your team, to remember those 3 letters and see if you can put them into practice. I hope that has been clear. I hope that you feel that that has been authentic. And I hope that you feel that I had some way of feeling how you guys feel, even though we can't see each other and even though we're on the other side of the world. Krupa, that's what I wanted to say about perhaps how we can at least begin to communicate with our teams in these times that are unprecedented in terms of the degree to which things all around us are changing.
Great. Thank you, Steve. That was very insightful. Authenticity, clarity, and empathy. I guess ACE is the name of the game. And audience, I don't know about you all, but I definitely want to be amongst the younger minds, embracing change and standing strong at the face, in the phase of change. So great. It is rightly said, and this is something that I wanted to bring up, that we cannot do today's job with yesterday's methods and be in business tomorrow. And I think Steve also, in the beginning of his chat, mentioned technological disruption, the pandemic, all of these things that, keep staring into our faces day in and day out. Hence, change is inevitable at an individual or at an organizational level. And decades of research have indicated that to maintain a lean and agile and a healthy organization, I would say, it is important to assess fitness levels across the organization in a holistic manner. And you must stay tuned till the end of this session, because we have something in store for you that is very relevant. I promise you that. We have something groundbreaking that will help you assess fitness levels across your organization for sure. On that note, to give us all a little perspective, I would like to invite our CHRO, Mr. Brilliant SK. He brings with him 25 years of work experience across diverse domains like education, IT, logistics, etc., having worked with blue chip organizations like Aptech, BNP Paribas, and SP Jain School of Global Management. He's also a certified executive leadership and strengths coach. So Brilliant, since you've been in the space for a considerable amount of time, you've tackled various scenarios where communication becomes critically important to manage change in the organization, to keep people together. It would be a pleasure to hear your thoughts, and please do help us pick Steve's brains too, since he's a mentor with us on this subject. Over to you both.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Krupa. And all I can say is wow, wow, wow. That was fantastic, Steve. Thank you for an insightful session. And thank you for taking us back to the mice in the maze, searching for cheese. It's so relevant in the current times that we are in. We have no choice but change for better and change now. And just like Krupa said, I love the acronym ACE. It makes a huge difference. Steve, I know you play football, and I thought I could correlate what my friend Charles Gate had said. Leadership is a contact sport where communication is the key. Now imagine I am in the field and the ball is with me. Should I pass? Should I hold and wait? Or continue to dribble? There's always a high level of anxiety depending upon how you see the field open up. And you need to act, you need to communicate effectively and ensure there is empathy as well. Especially in uncertain times like this, there is a need for organizations to understand when it is going through a transformation. And thank you once again, Steve, for saving that with all of us. My question to you is, how do you think communication can play a role in reshaping the work environment, especially during change?
Brilliant. I love the analogy about having the ball and do you pass, do you dribble, or what do you do with it? Of course, in that situation, you tend to act on feel, don't you? It's a question of what's happening around you. There's so many things going on. It's a very dynamic situation. And of course, business and the business world is a dynamic situation. There are so many elements that contribute to what we experience around us. But we do tend to have, don't we, a little bit more time, more often than not, than we do when we're in the center circle with the ball at our feet and people screaming at us to do this and not do that. So I think we can deploy certain tactics. I think you're right. And I think key to this is the difference between formal and informal lines of communication. And much of what I spoke about earlier on, particularly when we're standing in front of a PowerPoint screen, it's a formal presentation, isn't it? But I think we ought not to just say, well, that's it. I've done my bit. I've passed on all of the information. I've done everything Steve said to do. My slides are excellent. It's about more than that. You've also got to feel your way through it. And part of this empathy aspect is then having cordial lines of communication as well. You know, depending on the size of your organization, that may not be done directly through you, but some of your corporals will maybe do that down the line through the hierarchy. One-on-one communication, having a discussion about the specific challenges that a specific person will have in implementing the changes that you've directed from the top. So formal and informal lines of communication, I would say very, very important. We've also got to have a change narrative or a change story so everybody can remember. We know where we want to be. We all know where we are now. It must be clear the steps that need to be taken to get to our ideal destination. And telling that story, creating that narrative, and probably retelling it, maybe in different ways for different people, might be an important aspect of this too. We want to make sure that people stay tight to the line effectively, not because they are recalcitrant or because they're maverick in any way, but sometimes people lose focus about exactly where they should be going. So I think creating that narrative so that we can all nicely move in the direction we want to go. We're pulling in the same direction, preventing people from just losing their way slightly is also very key. And I think probably the third element to that, Brilliant, is to make sure that we have, I guess, a feedback loop. The option for people to talk to us. It's not just about how we talk to them. And I spoke earlier on about the sheer power, the selflessness, the humility, first and foremost, of being able to use other brains, of being able to be a facilitator. You're the leader, yes, but that doesn't mean to say all of the ideas must come from you. You're the leader for very good reasons, but there must be other people in the organization who can contribute elements to make the organization successful, and you, as an enabler of that, are the best leader you can be.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. And it makes me feel how if I were a footballer, everyone on the field wants the ball and I want to score. And thank you for telling us that it's important not just to have formal lines of communication. Many a times leaders tend to forget about the informal aspects where it's not about you, but it's about us, which makes the deal. And thank you for also mentioning that feedback is the key. And we all have heard this thousands of times. Feedback is the breakfast of champions. And if I were to summarize your response, I would just say to change, you need to collaborate, co-create, and celebrate. And storytelling, absolutely bang on. I love stories, and I've always heard that you tell a story and the story will sell. So, Steve, you also mentioned about your experience with Fox Sports, and I want to understand from you how you had to communicate change to your employees and what are the typical aspects where you found it challenging and some tips that leaders here in this session today could take back to their workplaces.
There is one instance that I often quote to people, Brilliant. We were, in the early days of SportsCenter, the format of the show would be that the presenter, such as myself, would have a link to camera. And then we would play a videotape with somebody else's voice, maybe showing the highlights of a game. And then it would be back to me to present the next story. And that was okay. But the modern day television was moving towards, I guess, putting the best voices, the most familiar voices, let's put it that way, throughout the show. So I would present the story, but then live over the footage of the football match or the cricket game, I would speak about what was going on. So it would be immediate. There would be a greater presence there. The energy was consistent because when you put a voice on videotape, it tends to be reflective, retrospective. So we're going up and down in terms of energy, but we maintained a high energy in the show. That was theoretically very, very good. But how were we, me and my fellow presenters, going to prepare for two shows, SportsCenter Asia and SportsCenter India, in one day and really triple our workload? Because we were no longer working just on the presenter links. We were also now working on the script to cover the footage of the various sports games. And I'd been to America and I'd see how the SportsCenter anchors work there. And actually before I'd been, I developed this technique for myself, but I felt now it was time to share it with my team. And the solution that I came up with, instead of writing a script that you would then read, you would just have a shot list. You know the sport well enough. So all you need on the shot list is the minute, the 61st minute. Who was involved? Let's say Cristiano Ronaldo. What did he do? Well, he curled in a ball that hit the post and went out for a corner. You've seen the footage several times as you rehearse during the day. All you need are those facts, because those facts we're likely to remember. Was it the 61st or the 63rd minute? You need that fact there. Was it Ronaldo or was it Raul? You need that fact there. Then in the moment, you can give that immediacy and that energy. And it was a transitional aspect for many people. It was something that I had to show could be done, as well as just say, look, this is how we're going to do it. I needed to show how it worked. I needed to, I guess, put myself on the line and show people that not only could it be achievable, that we could do 3 times more work, but actually the end result was going to be better, more even energy, more excitement. The voices that our audience are familiar with went right through the show, and the overall product was better. So I gave them the end game, I guess, that they could see, something to be excited about. And I like to think that I gave them the tools to work with. And we sit next to each other day in, day out. And it was a process. You didn't necessarily get that wonderful show on the very first day. But as we moved through time, we were able to achieve, I think, a much higher level of presentation and a better show as a result. Sometimes it's about putting yourself in that position and being the example, other than simply just being the person who says, this is how we're going to do it, and get on with it.
Fantastic. So from theory to implementation, and I remember our conversation just before we started the session. I know football, you play football. Knowing is knowing and doing is doing. Knowing and doing both are important. For me, the key takeaways from this response would be the 3 E's: the energy, the excitement, and knowing the end game. And many a times we miss out on the end game, what is in it for me and the organization. Thank you for that response, Steve. We have a few audience questions. We'll take a couple of them depending upon the time. So first off, we have Vinay, who's asked, in an online environment, the video is off. There are challenges that a leader faces. How do you ensure that as a leader, I connect with the audience in a virtual meeting?
Yeah, it's a good question, isn't it? We're all facing this. I think people's default generally is to turn their video off because, and let's face it, at the moment at least, we're at home. It doesn't seem intuitive to put makeup on, to dress nicely. We're at home, you know, we have home things to do. And also, not all of us are blessed with a space that we are willing to present as a background to our teammates. So it's understandable that people, given the choice, may want to switch off their vision. And I think as leaders, for the most part, we ought to be understanding and accept that, because let's not forget, as organizations, we are now invading our employees' personal space. We are getting to their homes and they are allowing us to use their homes to do their work. And I think as leaders, we ought to respect that at all times. If we have one-way communication, let's take that responsibility, put ourselves on screen and do some of the things that I spoke about earlier on. Make sure that we're looking at the viewfinder right there and not looking at the screen. Make sure that we're allowing ourselves to connect with the people who are undoubtedly watching us. Let's have that energy. Let's make sure that our face is well lit so that people can see the nuance that we're putting into what we're saying. They can see our facial expression, how our eyes and our eyebrows are working. Let's not be too cluttered with our background. Let's keep it simple if we can. Let's not have it as a distraction, at least. And let's make sure that we're framed, if I may say so, as you are, brilliant, you know, nicely framed. About your head space is about a quarter of the entire screen. You know, we're not too close, not too far away. And importantly, the laptop is at the right height, that the camera is at eye level. Too many people use the laptop for what the laptop was invented for, which was having it on the desk and typing. Means is we communicated in this way is that people end up looking up our nose, right? And they can see the ceiling above us, which is not the greatest view. So I think it's important that our team can see us. And certainly there will be times when there's a two-way exchange where it might be important for people to see various team members. And I think, you know, it's reasonable for team members to expect to appear in vision from time to time. But if it's not necessary, as leaders, let's respect the space, the environment of our people, and I guess give them the option just to do what is effectively an old-fashioned telephone call and just communicate with voice alone.
Thank you. And it reminds me of what I keep telling my team. At TPL, we don't do grand things, but we do small things that make a big impact. And you rightly emphasized on the need for empathy, which is the key, the thin line between home and work that has blurred. Let us respect privacy and make sure that at least if I am able to do it, I lead by example. Thank you so much, Steve. We have another audience member, Mohan, who's asked, hi, Steve, how can we manage work conflicts in an online work environment? An interesting question.
It is an interesting question. And I've been involved in several work conflicts myself. And I have to say, I'm not necessarily always proud of how I've handled it. And when you look back on these things, you tend to regret the moments where you weren't able to remain civil the whole time. And I think if you can maintain the high ground, not in a snooty way, not in a I'm better than you way, but just in a civil, polite way, then you're always going to win, at least to an extent. There are going to be differences of opinion. And if you're in a room and two people within that room of, let's say, 10 people are going head to head, it's the one who can't maintain his or her control, keep that element of civility, politeness, and respect, that everybody else in the room will be thinking, that's not very nice. People tend to side with the person who's being more civil, even if their argument actually could be weaker. So it's very important as to how you come across. Of course, it's very important in terms of the substance, what you're saying, the basis of your argument. But I think the key thing is to retain your civility, retain your professionalism, try and keep your emotions intact, and understand, the key to that is to opening yourself up to the possibility that other people have genuine opinions that may be valid. And that's all about, the empathy we talked about earlier on. Allow yourself to be that facilitator, to bring in other ideas. It may be that ultimately you shut them down. It may be that ultimately your idea was the smartest one, but open that door and let people discuss things with you. Retain that level of civility would be my advice based on experience as I look back in my past.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Steve. Civility and being open so that it can help you break the barriers that are there. It's just about 60 minutes and I feel it's a very short time. And if I were to say, it's like living a football match at halftime. I truly wish we had more time, Steve. I am loving it. I'm sure the audiences are also enjoying it. Thank you so much, Steve, for helping us understand why it is important to sculpt our communication for change. I'm sure all the audience would take back a lot of takeaways from the session. Personally, I would like to thank you and I would hand it back to Kripa. Over to you, Kripa.
Great. That was interesting. Thank you, Brilliant. And thank you, Steve, for that lovely teet-a-teet. I do have some takeaways, keeping it real, keeping it simple, getting in energy when you communicate with your teams, some amount of immediacy. And Brilliant, thank you so much for using the word sculpt. So you'll know why in a bit. Well, clearly, I'm saying this for the second time in this event. Change is inevitable. And the one thing organizations need to build is resilience and the ability to renew easily and thrive in the face of change. I guess all of us agree with that. And keeping that in mind, on behalf of the enterprise business of TPL, we have put in place a groundbreaking suite of OD products that addresses critical dimensions such as communication that leads to a shared vision. And I think Steve has given us a lot of insights of how communication is critical to get our teams together, to be able to make them look at that bigger picture and envision that bigger picture together. A shift in culture as and when it's required. The other dimensions are building leadership strength, having well-oiled processes so that your operations are seamless, all of which that will lead to a transformed business. So please stay with us. And I would like all of you to watch this short video that introduces our one-of-a-kind product, which is called Sculpt. Sculpt is an outcome of extensive research and some truly competent subject matter expertise. I'm sure once you watch the video, you will want to know more. And please do watch and share your suggestions through the chat box. I'm eager to read your suggestions too. Thank you for watching. We have received some suggestions and we will definitely review those comments. And that brings us to a close of this event. Don't go anywhere though. Join me in thanking Steve for the wonderful insights on how communication must be dealt with during uncertain times, an issue that leaders like us grapple with every single day. Thank you, Brilliant, for your valuable perspectives and participation. Last but certainly not the least, I would like to thank each one of you for taking time out of your busy schedules and joining us here today. Click on the tab at the bottom of your screen that says download resources for a surprise. More so, it's a token of our gratitude. And also click on the feedback tab and share your valuable feedback with us. Thank you and stay safe.